Joining us now for our daily intelligence brief, my old colleague on Capitol Hill, the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Pete Hoekstra of Michigan. Pete, we thank you and welcome you to America's Forum.
Hey, good morning, JD.
Pete, this Bergdahl swap has resulted in criticism on both sides of the aisle. The firestorm coming on the heels of the president parading Bergdahl's parents around in a Rose Garden ceremony to exploit what political goodwill he thought he would receive from this exchange. Has this entire endeavor totally and completely backfired?
Well, I think it really has. I think the president, what backfired here was the spin. Susan Rice starting it with saying it's an extraordinary day. He served with honor and dignity. Then the spin continued saying, we needed to get him now because it looked like, his health had severely deteriorated, and it all just went downhill. I think if the president or Susan Rice had just come out and said, you know what, we've got this principle, we're not going to leave anybody behind. We had no good choices. We made a choice. We're moving forward with it. We recognize some people are going to disagree with it, but amongst a bunch of bad choices, this was the best way to go forward. I think maybe the president would have been cut some slack, but when they came out and said, wow, this is a great deal for America, we're moving forward, the spin just got the president and this administration into trouble.
So it's just a situation where the administration has turned politically tone deaf?
It sure looks like it, because this is not a partisan issue. This is one where, Mike Rogers, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, but also Dianne Feinstein, the chairwoman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and a bunch of Republican and Democrat lawmakers in both houses have turned on the president and just said, this was a terrible decision. You never consulted. You never even informed Congress. So on a bipartisan basis, you just got a bunch of people who have turned on the president. The president could have very easily gone to the Hill or had some of his advisors go to the Hill, talk about this, consulted with them, not looking for their approval, but at least consulted and advised them that this is what they would have gone, this is what he was going to do, and I think he could have avoided much of this firestorm.
Another question for you. The swap has essentially wiped the VA scandal out of the news, but you combine the VA, Bergdahl, Benghazi, Ukraine. Do these scandals, do you think, have a cumulative effect?
Well, I think they really do, and I think JD and I talked a little bit about this last week when this first came out. It wiped the VA scandal off. It wiped out that the White House had released the name of the chief of station in Kabul. It had wiped out the bad economic news, and cumulatively, and this is what I think you're seeing with a lot of the Democrats, especially the red state Democrats who are running for re-election from the red states. They're not only running for re-election, they're running from this president. Because the cumulative effect is very, very negative to their political circumstances right now, and it's just driving the president's popularity down to unprecedented lows.
Well, Pete, it's not only those folks from red states, so to speak. California has become the bluest of blue states, sad to say. Dianne Feinstein, a senator from that state, as chairwoman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, had more to say about the Bergdahl swap. Take a listen.
They will make judgments, they will evaluate it, and if he needs to be tried in a military court, he will be.
So you hear Dianne Feinstein right there, Pete, and it seems that and I guess given her senior status and her role with intelligence, taking a step back, saying, look, the facts have to be brought out on Bergdahl. He could very well face court-martial is nothing more than a realistic assessment, perhaps even more than political damage control. Your thoughts?
Oh, that's exactly right. And, the president had all this information at his fingertips, as he was making this decision, as did his whole team. And this, again, I think is where it's a huge miscalculation, and where I think they were expecting some kind of celebration that this individual, that Bo, was going to be released. It was anything but that. And then over the weekend, you get a number of the people who served with him, who very much felt, at least as I read it, felt very betrayed by the actions and the decisions, going as far as believing that or being suspicious of the fact that he may have provided the Taliban or the Haqqani network with information that made their jobs more deadly and actually cost the lives of some of their other colleagues who were out looking for Bergdahl. And so, it's going to be a very difficult and ugly situation. It will play itself out over the next 6 to 9 months.
And the stepfather of Matthew Martineks, who died looking for Bergdahl, spoke out about why he shouldn't be considered a hero.
Our beef is not with the fact that he's home, but be honest. To treat him as a hero, he wasn't a hero. To have, high up officials say that he served with honor and distinction. And I think what happened is that got quite a few service members who knew the truth upset. And this is where it snowballed, and it doesn't make sense.
Pete, what would be your response to that? Hearing the stepfather of Matthew Martineks, who just spoke right there.
I think he's exactly right. We've got young men and women who went into horrible situations into Iraq and Afghanistan. They served with dignity. They came home. They did everything that their government and their military commanders asked them to do. We have others who went over there, did everything that they were asked to do, and were either wounded or were killed in action. The ones that went over and did exactly what their government asked them to do, whether they came home or whether they gave the ultimate price, heroes, those are the ones that served with honor and dignity, not the ones that, were very suspiciously left their post and deserted their friends and their colleagues in arms.
Pete, we also need to turn our attention to Russia this morning. Reports are out now that the KGB had its eye on young Mr. Snowden years before he exposed NSA secrets and took asylum in Moscow. Does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't. I've seen some of those reports. I guess he worked in Geneva. And one of the things that the Russians and the United States and the Chinese and others do in these kinds of posts or these kinds of cities where we are all represented, we are all looking for people that may be at some point in time willing to turn in or turn on their country and become spies for someone else. So I'm not at all surprised that the Russians may have been looking at Snowden and other people who have served in Geneva or served in other outposts around the world.
And in the here and now, an ex-KGB major says Russian spies posing as diplomats in Hong Kong tricked Snowden into going into Moscow. The ex-KGBer said it was a trick and he fell for it. Now the Russians are extracting all the intelligence he possesses. Pete, about a half a minute left. We understand this damage to the United States, the UK, to the Allies in terms of intelligence has been severe. Would you agree?
You will, because two things, J.D. Number one, the Russians probably are trying to extract as much information as they can get. The second thing is for our intelligence officials and the Brits and our allies, we have to assume that he has given them everything that he knows for us to move forward. We can't assume that he's actually keeping stuff that he had access to secret. To protect our sources, our assets, again, around the world, we have to assume that he has told the Russians and others very sensitive information.
Pete Hoekstra, as always, we thank you for the lowdown in our daily intelligence brief. We look forward to talking to you again soon. Very disturbing information about young Mr. Snowden. Your thoughts on that? We'd love to have them via Twitter. Why don't you tweet us at Newsmax TV?